Chapter 1. Before we begin. You are listening at novelfull.audio. How the heck am I back? Ji Lin sat up, clutching his head. He vividly remembered leading his troops against those corrupt jerks on the Civilization Expedition Team's battlefield. But then those deadbeats back at HQ cut off our backup. We couldn't hold the line, and a hell cannon blast turned me to dust. He checked the time on his phone. 2023, the last year of the old world, almost midnight. After tonight, the selection starts. All 100 million people get assigned identities, partners, and talents. He'd originally been slated as a multi-person lord, running a base with 2 other people, developing at whatever pace they could manage. Lords came in 2 flavors, multi-person and single-person. Single-person lords ruled their territories solo. Multi-person lords, as the name suggests, got a slightly bigger area, but the system paired you with others to govern it based on your supposed abilities. Basically, the system figured you weren't capable of running a territory by yourself. Multi-person lords started with more troops, and after each era, they got 1.5 times the number of troops compared to single lords. Some super-large lord groups even existed, but resources were limited. If they got along, they could last a while. Initially, when resources were plentiful, they developed faster than single lords, but as time went on, multi-person lords needed way more resources to advance than single lords. And not just regular resources, but those super rare ones that were a pain to get. Basically, multi-person lords needed almost double the resources to advance, even though their land was only slightly bigger. During that expedition, they were trying to reach the space age. The hegemony system had a rule: if a multi-person lord died, the resource cost for advancing went down. So they sold him, the expedition commander, out on the battlefield. Son of a bitch. Ji Lin muttered. He'd busted his butt, even if he hadn't always been thrilled about it. They deliberately withheld reinforcements, making him think he could hold out. Multi-person lords could become independent with a certificate of glory. Those were damn near impossible to get. Among the lords in the industrial age at that time, only a handful had ever used one, or, you could use a colink to connect yourself to a single lord. Colinks were a bit easier to find than certificates of glory, but who'd want to drag a dead weight along and make the game harder? Besides the certificate of glory and the colink, there was one last method: kill your teammates and become a single lord automatically. So some players would find a criminal player to colink with, then kill them, making the remaining player a single lord. People jokingly called this pole vaulting. The system was just as ruthless for players who didn't advance. If you refused to move forward and didn't get promoted, it would do something to you. System. Ji Lin shouted, hoping to summon the system that used to pop up even when he was on the toilet back in his past life. Nothing happened. Civilization hegemony hadn't even begun yet, so the system wasn't active. It just linked humans and other civilizations together, threw them into a massive battlefield, and acted as the ultimate overseer. Just gotta wait another hour. Detecting self-awakened. Incubation season begins in 1 standard hour. Startup complete. Questions. A light screen appeared, displaying the same cold text as always. Ji Lin stared. Why died? Had it always been there? A wild idea popped into his head, and he tried to suppress it. Since the allocation happened via lottery later, he'd start the allocation early and force himself to be a single lord. If there's no one else in the queue, they'll put you in solo. Awakened, closing if no questions. Can I be selected as a lord now? Seeing the light screen getting impatient, Ji Lin fired off his question. The screen froze, unresponsive. Calculation complete. Executing task. Reply. Begin identity selection now. Note: identity and talent are not officially obtained until activation. New text appeared. Select. Damn it, Ji Lin shouted, afraid of missing his chance. Entry complete. Lord Ji Lin, begin initial drawing. Human, elf, treant, rat, undead. To his surprise, single lords had more race choices than multi-person lords. In his previous life, he only had 2 options, the other 4 were usually bad starts. Elves and treants had high-quality, specialized magic tech trees. Ratmen had a population advantage, with building trees to boost numbers. And the undead had their own magic promotion trees. In his previous life, Ji Lin chose the Ratmen, a race that got strong in the mid-game. Ratmen weren't as individually powerful as humans, but their insane reproductive rate was impressive, especially against high physical stat races like elves. But a fully armored high elf private could easily wipe out tens of thousands of Ratmen. Because of their poor physique, armored Ratmen were often massacred in close combat by elven heavy infantry, but with the advent of firearms, the rat race underwent a transformation. Musket Ratmen, armed with tons of cheap firearms, greatly extended their attack range. A horde of tens of thousands could overwhelm the elf superior stats. In the early to mid-game, though, food consumption was a killer. Human intelligence allowed their low-level units to perform better after the mid-game. Now, the Ratmen were an option again. The other four, elves, treants, and undead, hadn't appeared in his previous life. These three had obvious advantages. They could unlock magic talents in the classical era, using those bonuses to build unique buildings earlier. Treants had the best early game. The ideal farming race, they integrated units and buildings. They were strong defensively in the early and mid-game and had low micromanagement, letting lords survive the early game easily. He chose humans this time. As the base race, humans refreshed his entire selection pool. Everyone could see the human selection options, while other races were randomized. If a race was useless, people could only default to humans. Choosing humans multiple times led to a hidden bonus, gaining +10 stability. The player forum had figured out a unique strategy, using humans as the core. By constantly choosing pureblood when advancing eras, stacking the bonuses from each era, you could achieve insane total bonuses. Later, the Civilization Hegemony First Legion used this method to become the strongest lord group. Even if unsuccessful, humans could still transform in many ways. Their main advantage was all-around adaptability. You could go the tech route or the magic route. There were even evil spells, runes, and tech multiclassers, but the resource drain for those builds was so severe that only lords with tons of resources could pull it off. Unlike specialized races that were stuck in one direction, transformation was incredibly difficult. Landscape randomized. Territory terrain, plain X1, swamp X1, floodplain X1. The initial Civilization Hegemony territory consisted of land controlled by the main town center, with 2 adjacent plots, for a total of 3 rectangular blocks. Multi-person lord territories were larger. He was surprised by the initial plain. A bad starting terrain was usually a death sentence, and the floodplain was a pleasant surprise. Floodplains were excellent initial terrains, with sediment deposited by floods improving soil quality and making it ideal for farming. Floodplain meant there had to be a river. Rivers were usually random, and different terrains only increased the probability. Floodplains were better than some rare terrains in this case. Sweet, Ji Lin hummed happily. Chapter 2 Territory. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Okay, here's the translation. Choose your starting army. Primitive spearman, primitive thrower, or savage ogre. Starting troops aren't just for show. The system throws a wave of enemies at you every month based on your current level. All lords in the same era face the same danger level, but it scales with the total number of lords. Lords later on jokingly call this wave the January reward. After each attack wave, the system rewards you based on your performance, and the enemies themselves are a resource. The Savage Ogre is a bit of a cheat. Usually, a starting unit card has a full complement, but the Savage Ogre is special with only 12 units. Think of these big, strong creatures with clubs as a subspecies of ogres. They're the right species, and they average around 8 feet tall. It's a cheat because they eat so much. Regular units can farm to boost the territory's food production when they're not fighting. Savage ogres are too big and clumsy. They'll trample the fields and wreck the crops, so they're only good for heavy labor. Other lords who recruited barbarians found this out the hard way. They'd plow the fields, only to have the newly planted crops stomped flat, slowing down their progress to the next era. Primitive spearmen and primitive throwers. I chose primitive spearmen as my starting troops. They have low upkeep and are pretty versatile. Early on, spear infantry can hold their own against just about anything the enemy throws at you. Primitive throwers are a little weaker. They have range, sure, but without a front line, they'll get slaughtered if the monsters get close. They get better once you upgrade them to archers. Lord identity confirmed, Lord, G. Lin, territorial race, ogre type, Lord talents, : Foresight, minus 10% resource cost for advancement until the space age. Fire extinguisher, plus 10% morale damage, plus 40% morale damage against natural disasters. Plan defender, minus 20% morale decline in defensive stance, plus 10% defense. Battlefield maneuvering, master plus 15% army movement speed, minus 10% army attrition from movement. Combat talents affect armies led by the Lord and those attached to the territory. Building, town, army, 100, territorial ogre population, 200/400, population capacity. Territorial buildings, town, basic residence x20, territory traits, none, territory, plain x1, floodplain x1, swamp x1. G. Lin looked at his stat card and felt a surge of happiness. This start was way better than before, plus, the talents I had earned previously carried over with me through time. Among them, foresight is a racial talent. Humanity had developed before the space age, so it reduces the resource cost for advancement. I wondered if the human race had developed into the space age at the beginning of the game. If so, people wouldn't be fighting each other over resources. Fire extinguisher is a specialized talent for fighting natural disaster legions and hell legions. Only after G. Lin got this talent did he realize that fighting chaotic evil forces can also rely on morale damage to defeat them. The lower the morale, the worse the combat, but still very important. Plan defender and battlefield maneuvering are both talents that improve over time. The more battles you fight, the greater the bonus. Looking back, I had it pretty rough before. I only got 3 talents on my way to the information age, and none of them were unique to me. 100 of the ogre population are primitive spearmen, and the rest are primitive residents the system gives you. G. Lin reached out and picked up the ID card in his hand. He looked at his own ID card carefully and couldn't put it down and started playing with it. I couldn't keep up with those monster lords before, but now I can use my experience and knowledge to come out on top. G. Lin waited for the game to launch. Loading. Civilization will survive project initiated. You are lucky enough to qualify for the survival battlefield, but always remember that others will want to take your territory. You will lead your territory from the dark ages to the stars. In infinite civilization evolution branches, you can use all technologies to advance your civilization, magic, technology, runes, change and create in different eras. A territorial civilization completely controlled by you. The cocoon is finally breaking. G. Lin lay on the bed and listened to the same mechanical voice he'd heard before, feeling all kinds of emotions. He closed his eyes, trying to remember his past, but there's nothing worth remembering, no mother, no one to care about. The past is over, and it's time to start a new journey. Follow this difficult journey to reach the stars. I repeated the system's words. So, everyone, let's get going. The manager wishes you good luck. A breeze brushed my cheek, and the faint scent of grass filled my nose. G. Lin opened his eyes. I saw a familiar blue sky, and those walls of fog that cut off the world at the edge of my vision. The fog wall marks the border of my territory. Everything inside that fog wall is mine, and I'll be tilling my own little patch of land for a long time to come. Same as before. G. Lin stood up and looked around. He saw a cluster of small wooden huts made from roughly hewn logs. The square 2-story building of gray wood surrounded by these wooden houses and built by gray wood was noticeably larger than the other buildings. That was the town, dark age. Requirements to advance to the next era: 1,000 units of food, 400 wood, 100 gold, 100 iron. Food, wood, gold, iron. The 5 basic resources in the early game will change as time goes on. Oil will show up in the Industrial Age. Alloys and concrete will replace wood and iron after the Primitive Age. Rare resources will appear in the Information Age, and the magic tech tree will add a new resource, magical elements. Besides the basics, there are rare resources that show up on the resource panel as you discover them, things like runes, sub-resources, the blood of gods, and so on. That's all a long way off for Ji-Lin. Right now, it's the Dark Ages. Ji-Lin glanced at his resource panel, displayed along the bottom: food, 100 units, gold, 0 units, wood, 0 units, head, 0 units, population, 200. No rare resources to speak of. Each unit of food feeds 10 people for a day. The system food is a soft gel that the Lord can convert and store. Later on, when there are more food types, you have to worry about how different foods affect the population's stability. Eating delicious, nutritious food makes people happier. Stability is a hidden stat early on. It only shows up on the panel after you unlock social sciences. No need to overthink it now. Just chow down on the gel. Time to prepare for the upgrade. When you upgrade, the system throws a wave of enemies at you to test you. If you have the resources and beat the enemy, you upgrade. If the town gets destroyed, you lose. This wave is a nightmare for a lot of players. Countless lords thought they were ready, then got steamrolled. Ji-Lin headed toward town. Time to take charge of his territory. Chapter 3 Chat Forum. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ji-Lin entered the village, greeting the villagers dressed in black, but they only stared back at him with a mix of awe and fear. "How long have you been here?" he asked, grabbing a villager by the arm. Back in the old Civilization Lasts Forever game, players had all sorts of theories about the population situation. Some figured the memory of captured people was wiped clean, others guessed they were clones. The game never gave a straight answer, so it was all just speculation. "My lord," the villager stammered, bowing quickly. "I've always lived here." "Right, okay, never mind. Get back to it." Ji-Lin watched him go, sighing. "I don't have any work, my lord. Please, give me instructions." The villager bowed again, still awestruck. Ji-Lin paused, realizing he hadn't actually given anyone orders yet. "Gather everyone in the town square." Ji-Lin stood before the town gate, looking at the villagers and soldiers assembled before him, standing in neat lines on either side. The villagers were a mix of men and women, all with a similar look, unremarkable faces. The spearmen were all male, dressed in rough linen, but their arms and legs were thick with muscle. Like trained soldiers, each held a spear tipped with iron ore. 100 villagers, 100 spearmen. Half the population was idle. The population ratio seemed stable. This was the classic starting challenge of Civilization Lasts Forever. Managing a wildly unbalanced population while scrambling to build infrastructure and upgrade fast. Things were always rough at the beginning. This was the make-or-break point for players. One wrong call about farming, hunting, or gathering, and entire territories would crumble from starvation. The brilliance of Civilization Lasts Forever was that it never let you get away with an easy upgrade. Every era, every path, was riddled with traps. Only civilizations led by players who could see those traps coming thrived. Every empire that looked shiny and strong had to fight tooth and nail to get there. Heavy industry had polluted the world and drained it of its elemental energy. Focusing on internal stability and the blending of different races was the only way forward. The game would throw random events at you, giving you population boosts or extra materials. If you were incredibly lucky, you could snowball off those events, but Ji-Lin didn't bank on luck. The surest way to get population and resources was to grind your way to the next era. That's when the game refreshed territory resources, population booms, food shortages, collapse. That was the story for almost every player who tried to max out their upgrades without any breathing room. He wouldn't make that mistake. Ji-Lin turned his attention to the primitive spearmen and pulled up their stats. Name, primitive spearman. Quantity, 100. Adjustable, melee defense, 48. Movement speed, 3 MP8. Armor strength, 0. Organization, 50. Weapon power, 5. Features, military. Formation, plus 10% melee block, resist charge, reduces enemy charge bonus against this unit, against type, increased weapon damage and hit rate against designated types. The stats were pretty balanced, with 100 units to a squad. You could set up a proper command structure later. Once you built a barracks, you could adjust the troop numbers however you liked. An organization rating of 50 was solid for the Dark Ages. With Ji Lin's abilities, he could get these spearmen fighting like they had nothing to lose, making it tough to completely deplete their morale. Armor strength determined how much damage armor could absorb. The higher the number, the more damage could be deflected. This squad of spearmen had no armor at all. That number would change once they geared up. The higher the number, the more likely the damage would be reduced, possibly even to zero, similar to how a pistol can penetrate 200 mm homogeneous steel. Melee defense reflected the unit's ability to block. It was the chance of dodging an attack, an average influence by battlefield conditions. Military formation gave the spearmen better defensive capabilities. It also meant they could follow Ji Lin's basic formation commands. The bonus was more than just the listed 10% block chance. Some races, like Ratmen and Undead, had similar abilities from the start. But special units, like Barbarians, went wild in a fight, foregoing the formation bonuses altogether. The leader, stepped forward. Ji Lin's face was stern. Yes. You're our leader, my lord, a middle-aged villager replied, stepping out from the crowd. He wore thicker clothes than the others. A strong, weathered-looking spearman also stepped forward from his formation. They both dropped to one knee before Ji Lin. He'd been dealing with smarter people and forgot how basic these initial units were. They weren't really people, just simple robots, flesh and blood automatons, which made things easier. They'd get smarter as time went on. Century leader, Changheng. General, level 1. Features, Centurion, stronger base stats, stamina recovery plus 20%, injury recovery plus 50%, hunter, attack power against wild animals plus 10%. Village head, Chongshan. Affairs officer, level 1. Features, agriculture focus, agriculture-related zoning minus 10%, maintenance minus 5%, output plus 5%, not bad, Ji Lin thought, nodding. Centurion showed their current position, which would change with job shifts. The name after that was their actual name. Every player started with 2 hero units, but their traits varied. Some unlucky players might get duds, while others lucked out with high-level officers. Changheng and Chongshan were solid picks. Stamina boosts were valuable before the Industrial Age. Hunter improved food yields, and agriculture focus made farming cheaper and more efficient. Chongshan, take the villagers and scout the area for resources. Keep a record of what you find. Changheng, you're with them, protecting them. Fall back if you run into trouble. Ji Lin issued the orders clearly. If he didn't, people would slack off, meaning lost resources and slowed progress, which, when you added it all up, was like losing a fortune. The spearmen should be able to handle any monsters around the starting resource points. Fighting would slow down exploration, and anyone who played strategy games knew the importance of mapping the area. His goal was to have the spearmen reveal the land around the base, then issue more specific orders. Even with the game's accelerated growth, farming was still better than hunting early on. Ji Lin sat at the town gate, watching the crowd disperse. He couldn't go exploring with the villagers and soldiers. He needed to learn more about the territory. After all, it was his first time being a human lord. A wave of emptiness washed over him, a deep, bottomless void. He opened the game's forum. What people loved most to do was post and chat. With modern entertainment gone, the forum was all they had. It was practically the main form of entertainment for the humans. Other forms of entertainment, some people had even started writing serialized stories on the forum, making a living off tips from other lords. He wanted to see if the situation had changed since the old game. Ji Lin pulled up the system interface and switched to a new panel. The forum looked strangely familiar, like it was ripped off from something else. Communication forum, trading market, territory ranking, only the forum and market were lit up. The ranking was grayed out. He clicked the forum. Dark Age, related sections have been created. As eras advanced, different partitions would open up, used for players who shared similar traits to communicate, and each partition also had a small system-mandated partition. Everyone was at 0, so the chat was just chaos. 90% of the posts were asking for help. There were still people waking up, and plenty of others were eager to explore their territories. I can't believe I'm back. I want to quit this game and go back to reality. Thank God, my kid and I are multiplayer lords. This has to be a prank, right? Someone, anyone, please answer me. Help. There's a skeleton night camp a kilometer outside my territory. I picked the undead to start. What do I do? Help. Tough luck, getting hit with a high-level enemy right off the bat. Skeleton Knights were next-era troops. The system shouldn't make that mistake, unless it was special terrain, the land of the dead. Lin started to reply, but the post vanished in the flood of messages. The land of the dead was the promised land for undead players. Lin was a little jealous. Even with the system splitting people into different regions, the post would be buried in seconds. I picked the elves. Elf girls are so hot. Pointy ears, skimpy outfits, hee, I'm gonna live the harem dream. Good luck with that. Everyone, I picked the rat people. So many of them, and their eyes are all green. If I run out of food, they'll eat me. A single rat is already scary enough. Yeah, they'll probably kill each other first. I'm the Dragon Lord. I can't believe I got such a powerful start. I'll become the hero of this world. When I'm the king, I'll shut this game down and bring you all back. The Dragon Lord was more like a dragon babysitter. It wasn't easy catering to those spoiled brats. Hope you've got the patience for it. I got the primal Zerg nest. They're all baring their teeth. I have nowhere to live. Urgent. What should I do? That one was pretty common. Very unique, but very uncomfortable to transform. Basically, there is no transformation space, the only way is to die. I picked Golin. I'm gonna crush those guys. They won't get a chance to work. Always one. While Golin can enter and become a goblin, accept your choice, the system will give you a second chance. That day, the old man of science passed away peacefully. You're right. Chapter 4 Planning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After closing the chat, Lin opened the site's building interface. Now, you might wonder, there are tons of items, and Steel alone has countless ways to process it. Add up all the methods, and you're talking millions, maybe more. Item production is directly tied to buildings. Only specific buildings can make specific items. A regular blacksmith can bang out basic armor, but special armor, like the kind players get with spell enhancements, needs special buildings. Think of it like Yunnan Baiyao. You need the Yunnan Baiyao pharmacy to make the real deal. These specialized buildings maintain the original item's quality. When you're building up your territory, era restrictions don't apply. If you snag the walking spider factory from the Steam Age during the Dark Age, and that spider needs steel, and you're advanced enough to build steel furnaces, you can still make steel even if the Dark Age typically only knows how to make steel by beating rocks together. And remember, troops aren't a one-time expense. Keeping them maintained takes resources. Stretching too far beyond your era with your production can easily bankrupt you. The system will sell basic blueprints in the market, but only players in that era can buy them. However, unless it's absolutely necessary, blueprints are usually cheaper after players actually advance to that era. Besides these standard blueprints, there are 3 ways to get building blueprints: destroying wild monsters. There's a chance of getting blueprints for your current era, getting blueprints from the system based on how well you're doing in leveling up your era, and completing combat missions in mission worlds. There are 2 kinds of missions. First, there are the forced PvP exercises where the system throws all players against each other periodically. After the colonial era, some of these exercises get replaced by expedition missions. What's the difference? In the exercises, you die. In the expeditions, you really die. He died in a particular expedition mission. The second type is single or multiplayer mission worlds that players open themselves. You get the mission books to open these worlds by killing wild monsters. Lin's plan is to level up fast and then hit the market for a mission book. Before the prices stabilize, He can use it to open a dungeon and grab building blueprints from future eras. Every game start has its little differences, and then there are those rare terrains that randomly select you. Once players start expanding, a ton of blueprints and mission books pop up. That's his cue to move. Dungeon levels are ranked, X, A, B, C, D. He needs to use his knowledge from being reborn and dive straight into the high-level mission worlds to snag heroes while he still remembers them. He spent his previous life reading up on strategies in the forums. Even though the old system had a lot of dungeons, it wasn't nearly enough for the number of players. It seems designed to keep players from farming the same dungeon over and over, getting all the building tech, and then jumping eras with maxed out buildings and production that's way ahead of everyone else. You only get a reward once per dungeon. No matter how well you do, a player can hire other players to help them clear a dungeon, or cobble together a barely functional territory. Blueprints and units from later eras are super expensive. The cheaper ones are all from the same era, so it's usually cheaper to just upgrade what you already have. As player numbers grow, and because everyone only gets one reward per dungeon, but can still participate afterward, strategies pop up like crazy. Everyone wants their chance to shine, and it's a way to build reputation and get resources. It's basically using the dungeon for all it's worth. The harder the dungeon, the longer it takes for strategies to come out. The heroes in each dungeon are unique and can only be brought out once. Some A and X level dungeons are only theoretically possible. No one has ever gotten the top reward. With strategies, leaders can get good benefits in low-level dungeons step by step. Also, the system doesn't seem to have a clear idea of dungeon drop rates for each level. The drop rate of the same level is not so large that the price of excellent C and D level task books is equal to that of X level task books, and the price of B level task books exceeds that of A and X level task books. Low-level dungeons are easier to get into and pay out faster, but high-level dungeons can cost you money if you only meet the minimum standard for getting troops. Most leaders stick to low-level dungeons for basic units and buildings and hit mid-level dungeons to get units that are one era ahead. Long live the power card. As for A and X level dungeons, players love them. The soldiers are cool, and they are done after they are defeated. G. Lin focused on the buildable panel in front of him. You start with only 3 building blueprints. Basic housing, 20 wood. Dark Age provides housing for 10 people. Town center, 400 food, 200 wood, 100 stone, 100 gold. Dark Age controls land and allows building. Barracks, 100 wood, 50 stone. Dark Age trains troops. He has everything but the barracks, and you can only have one town center per plot. He's itching to get his barracks up. He figures that a team of basic spearmen will be enough to carry him to the next era. In Civilization lasts forever. You can give troops special orders besides the system defaults, like telling them to farm or train in the barracks, which is way more effective than just letting them wander around. If it works, just make do with it. He walked into the town center. The inside is small, maybe 150 square meters, with a long brown wooden table in the middle. He went through the hall to the leader's private room in the back. He found paper in his room. The system is pretty good about giving you the basics, like the pristine paper and pens that would have been around at this time. You don't get a lot, but it can really help with planning. He checked the forums and found out that most players' rooms are exactly the same. The only exceptions were civilizations without any concept of houses. He sat down and started copying all the important info and plans he remembered onto the paper. Writing it down is the best way to keep from forgetting. A good memory is like a bad pen. He missed his old math teacher. He remembered when he got to the artillery era, a bunch of math whizzes showed up out of nowhere and crushed everyone with early artillery. Fighting artillery duels with math teachers wasn't exactly fair. They even made a whole forum just for artillery tactics. You're constantly thinking about the best angle to fire shells from. He got out the map that came with the system. It shows 5 green dots and a square marking the town center. The 5 dots are his scout parties. 5 spearmen and 5 villagers in each group should be enough to keep them safe. The scouts have already found a small lake near the village. He's lucky. At least he has a water source nearby. Water is life. Even a small lake saves him the trouble of digging wells or finding new water sources. Based on their current pace, G. Lin figures he can explore the entire plain around his spawn point in 2 days. He needs to explore the whole area and map out everything within a 10-kilometer radius. He used to be a noob. But after years of being a leader, he's a pro at making maps. Quickly scouting terrain and planning attacks is essential for every leader. The battlefield is the best teacher. Before, he was a lone wolf, so he could just let his powerful leader handle everything. If he doesn't get a good hero commander and affairs officer, he'll have to get out there himself. Division of labor is essential. Muscle memory didn't come back. The lines he drew on the paper looked like a bunch of squirming worms. It's not bad, just make do with it. For now, he'll build a mud wall around the whole village using wood and mud. A 2-meter wall will be enough to stop anything in the Dark Age. Thanks to the system's auto-build bonus, it's not too hard. It'll only take a little while to throw up a mud wall around the village. When he hits the next era and gets the basic city wall blueprint, he'll build a proper 1 square kilometer city wall, with plenty of room to grow. After sketching out the wall, Lin left a gate in the northeast, facing the floodplain. He plans to build his second town center there and combine the resources of the floodplain with his current plain. The single swamps that generate are herbaceous swamps. They are rich in biological resources and food, and also produce various rare plants and animals, but they are not suitable for early development. The low-lying waterlogging and large areas of muddy areas overgrown with weeds can slow down the speed of action, making exploration difficult, and road planning is directly desperate in the face of waterlogging. The development cost is extremely high. Swamps that merge with terrain will become woody swamps and peat moss swamps. If extremely rare resources are refreshed in the marginal area, it is possible to consider development, and in-depth development is in his plan. Floodplains are way better. They're good for farming, but they flood periodically, which can damage buildings. On the other hand, the floods bring nutrients to the land. Once he gets the dam blueprint, he can turn the flooding into a resource. After building water control, a river is obviously crucial for economic growth. Later on, he plans to dig a canal to bring water from the floodplain rivers to his plain and other areas, so the rivers can provide transport between different plots. Besides combat skills, his experience from being reborn gives him an edge in territory planning. If he plays his cards right, he can get ahead. Chapter 5: The First Night. You are listening at novelfull.audio. From the town center gate as the central point, continuous construction can meet his spatial needs through the 3rd and 4th eras within 1 square kilometer. Scouts have mapped the surrounding area. Within a 10-kilometer radius of the town center, one team was attacked for getting too close, but it was just a few wandering enemies near a resource point, and there were no casualties. The area includes a large berry bush, 3 large forests, a small open pit mine, and a large lake. Resource points vary in size from micro to giant. New resource points will appear periodically based on the current era, ensuring a long-term supply of resources for the Lord. It's a blessing to be on a plain. The large berry bush ensures a food supply in the early game, and the berries taste great. The 3 large forests provide enough wood until the 3rd era without needing additional lumbering. The only drawback is that the garrison strength at these resource points is tied to the resource reserves. Except for the small open pit mine, the number of guarding monsters is the same as in the larger ones, which makes things tricky. He'd rather have a smaller one than a large one. The Lord can construct facilities to manage resource points. For example, an orchard expands berry production instead of depleting the bush. Special structures can turn finite resources, like rare plants and animals, into renewable ones. Resources are abundant on the plains, with plenty of food and wood, and a nearby water source. Besides the 6 resource points, the scouting parties also found some unexpected treasures. They gathered 100 pieces of wood, 20 pieces of stone, and even 20 pieces of gold from the wilderness. In addition to dedicated resource points, there are some low-level resources scattered randomly. Lumberyard, mining site, collection station, these are all part of his plan. He only intends to build these 3 in the Dark Ages to supplement necessary resources. If they aren't enough, he'll buy more at the market. Basic blueprints are common and cheap to acquire. He needs to evaluate the open pit mine. The system dictates that only the Lord can perform the final exploration of a resource point to gain data, learning the specific reserves and enemy types. Subordinates can gather this data after the papermaking technology is developed later. The open pit mine will always produce stone, and either gold or iron, with a small chance of yielding rare minerals. He will lead his troops to clear it out tomorrow. Ji Lin set down his pen and looked out the window. The sun was setting. This small world, only a few hundred square kilometers, has a normal day-night cycle of 24 hours, but there's no moon, no moonlight, and no atmospheric light from the sun at night. Night is no longer an understatement. There's truly no light in the sky. The only light in this small territory is the fire near the town center, burning a piece of wood every hour. Ji Lin misses the starry sky and feels the ancient world's tedium. This is his first night in this life. A lack of entertainment makes you restless. No phone, no books, no clock. After telling Chongshan to wake him at sunrise, Ji Lin went to bed. He tossed and turned. He opened the player forum. Everyone was experiencing their first night, and these players were swiping the screen more intensely than during the day. Players without entertainment always find an outlet. Browsing the forum before bed is a bad habit from his previous life. Many people are spending a sleepless night. Ji Lin glanced quickly. In less than a day, strategy-focused players have replaced the newbie help crowd online. Are they always this adaptable? OMG, I sent my goblins out exploring, 2 against 1, and they got wiped out by wild wolves at a resource point. Losing 20 goblins so early really sucks. The undead are where it's at. I was freaked out seeing skeletons, but they're pretty strong. Even if they die, they respawn at the hall over time and don't need food. Plus, dead monsters resurrect my army. PSH, elves are better. 20 of them killed wild wolves without a scratch. And at night, I can order the elf sisters to sleep with me, I'm never logging off. This time travel rocks. Lucky, my tree is just chilling in the sun and producing tasty fruit. Lucky +1, would you share some fruit? My 400 rats have eaten a third of my food. A few died today, and I barely managed to snag a berry bush. Hi everyone, you're all having fun. I just brushed my dragon uncle's toes at home and passed out from exhaustion. He browsed the forum for an hour, then went to sleep. Everyone is so adaptable. The question that lingered before he drifted off was why the conversation shifted from the strength of elves and dragons to their looks. Ji Lin was puzzled. A powerful kind of beauty. At daybreak, Ji Lin, Chonghang, and a group of primitive spearmen marched out across the green grassland. The hundreds of people marching left a dark green trail on the emerald grass. How long has it been since he woke up this early? In the past, he squandered his potential by failing to change his sleep schedule. It's called a plain, but the terrain isn't entirely flat. There are rolling hills that block the view, with shrubs and tall grass covering them. His destination is a large forest a kilometer to the north and a small mineral vein behind it. His talent, battlefield mobility, directly enhances his movement. He knew his physical condition wasn't great. In his previous life, he barely managed to lead those rats on a full-speed march, even with training. When he acquired this talent, he stopped relying on his feet and entered the era of mounts. Now he can lead a team of spearmen at full speed, which is a huge advantage. He focused on the forest, and its data appeared. Resource, subtropical forest, type 1, reserves, wood, 10,000, production, 75 wood/day, development, lumberyard, capacity, 25, introduction. A forest of tall trees, with smaller shrubs growing beneath them. 10,000 wood reserves is a lot, enough to last until the third era, but the logging speed is slow without any technology. The lumberyard needs to run for 8 days to meet his current wood demand. He raised his hand and gave the order. Chonghang, change from marching formation to advancing formation. Following his command, the marching formation behind him spread out into 2 lines of dense spears. Each resource point is guarded by wild monsters. If they wait until they're right next to a resource point to attack, they'll take heavy losses. Humans are too weak to withstand attacks from wild wolves, goblins, and other common monsters. He plans to train against the guards at this type of resource point first. Chapter 6, Spider Hunt. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When they got close to the woods, a creepy rustling sound came from within, and then a bunch of gray shapes burst out and landed on the grass. Ji Lin squinted. It was a pack of hyena-sized spiders, their dark gray, chitinous shells covered in fuzz. 8 pairs of compound eyes glowed with an eerie green light as they faced down the intruders who dared enter their territory, their 8 thick spider legs spread out, ready to attack, twitching impatiently and leaving marks in the mud. The giant gray owl clicked its beak, seeing that Ji Lin had brought reinforcements. The spiders held back, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Name, hunting spider, type, beast, dark age, armor strength, 0. Melee defense, 40, weapon power, 3. Abilities, pack tactics I, increases the health and dodge chance of the unit. This effect caps at 30% when the unit is outnumbered by at least 2 to 1, not active. Beast instinct, the death of a comrade fuels their aggression. Swift, increased speed. Introduction, don't go it alone. Ji Lin frowned, these garrison troops were actually top-tier Dark Age monsters. Hunting spiders were notorious for wiping out new lords. Their pack tactics alone could frustrate even the best single melee unit. The only way to deal with them was a slow, grinding fight, and to make matters worse, they were fast and hit hard. Luckily, he had enough spearmen. Their swarm tactics wouldn't work against him. If the pack tactics weren't activated, it meant the spiders didn't outnumber his spearmen, and spiders without numerical superiority were no match for humans. If ratmen or golem orcs ran into this many spiders, they'd definitely take casualties. Even barbarians early in the game, if not carefully managed, would suffer serious losses. These spiders had chitinous shells, but it didn't count as armor. They could be domesticated and trained as scout spiders. With enough food, their shells would thicken, and their bodies would grow larger, giving them an armor rating of 10. Even classical-era infantry only had an armor rating of 10. Advance. Ji Lin gave the order. He could feel both of his talents, destroyer and planned defender, kicking in. Such a wide spear formation would be too spread out on a battlefield, but it was perfect for fighting spiders that couldn't exert any real force. The spear tips lowered, the points of 100 spears glinting coldly in the sun. Too heavy, not agile enough, those were usually weaknesses. But forming a military formation turned those weaknesses into strengths. Agility didn't matter when you could compensate with numbers. The enemy in front of them had little space to maneuver. And being heavy didn't matter, they just needed to hold the line and push forward. One was long, the other was strong. Thrust, that simple action was everything to the spearmen. Even if you dodged one attack, the fatal stabs coming from every direction would end you. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The spiders who'd rushed out of the forest to fight on open ground were doomed from the start. The wall of death formed by the spears blocked off all escape routes. The first strike came from Chongheng in the center of the formation. With a powerful, precise stab, he took down a spider charging him, lifted it high, and slammed it to the ground. The scent of its blood drove the remaining spiders into a frenzy, and they screamed as they charged the spears. Beasts weren't too bright after all. Facing the advancing spearmen, the spiders stupidly rushed toward the wall of death. Without any room to move, the spiders seemed so vulnerable. No matter how scary they looked, they couldn't change the situation. Trapped in the forest of spears, they were impaled one by one. If a spider tried to jump, it was met with a stabbing spear that pinned it to the ground, and then more cold steel pierced its heart. Ji Lin even saw a flicker of fear in some of the soldiers' eyes, which made him realize how human they still were. The military formation was working perfectly. As long as they held their formation, morale would stay high. The spider numbers were dropping rapidly. Their attacks couldn't reach the spearmen, but every thrust of the spears brought another spider's life to an end. This wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Raise spear, thrust, the last attacking spider fell to the ground, dead. The remaining spiders panicked and fled back into the forest. Ji Lin didn't even need to give commands. The spearmen had taken care of it themselves. He just stood behind the formation, providing buffs and oversight. Ji Lin touched his chest and realized he was sweating. He was still nervous. After all, there were still some left. Wait, Ji Lin looked at the system notification with a strange expression. Eradication complete, hostile target, hunting spider, Controlled, type 1 forest, Acquired blueprint, lumberyard, food reserves plus 31, The spider nest is terrified of you due to morale collapse, and has changed from hostile to independent. A new icon appeared on the forest on the minimap, a spider logo floating above the Type 1 forest, and the forest changed from independent gray to controlled green. The drop rate for hunting spider meat was pretty low. They'd killed over 70 spiders before the system prompted an increase of 31 food reserves. Hunting spider nest, ability, hatches hunting spiders, development, ranch, quantity, 29, introduction, hunting spiders that aren't hungry are extremely docile. Please remember to feed them. Lin was in a good mood. He'd not only gotten the lumberyard blueprint, but his own 10% morale damage had been the final straw that broke the spiders, giving him a special resource, a spider nest. That was a great thing. If a lord got lucky, he could break the morale of wild monsters and turn them into independent entities that could be developed for resources. Elves, treants, and demons found it easiest to tame hunting spiders, but it was hard for humans. So, if the human race wanted these useful scouts, they had to buy them on the market. Spider legs were also a rare delicacy. While Lin took the spearmen out to deal with wild monsters, the domestic farmers weren't idle. He'd instructed them to use wood and mud to build mud walls. Using wood as a frame, they filled the frame with mud to create a stable structure, piling up vertical mud walls to keep enemies out. 100 people built a 2-meter-high mud wall around the village. Some lords chose to build resource buildings inside their settlements to avoid attacks on buildings built outside, but that meant expanding the defended area, which was extremely difficult. On the 10th day, Lin's goal was to face 2 waves of enemy attacks head-on, so he wasn't about to build resource buildings inside his base. If the population didn't need houses to live in, he might even give up the 20 houses he had. It would be easy to block the entrance and withstand 2 waves of attacks. Stepping through the corpses on the ground, the strong smell of blood made his body send out uncomfortable signals. He'd seen all kinds of corpses and blood before, but after his rebirth, he had a strong reaction to the scary spider corpses. After clearing out the area, Lin used the lumberyard blueprint. The blueprint wasn't used automatically after obtaining it. It was first stored on the lord's back. In the future, the lord could sell the blueprints that he did not need. There were many useless wonder blueprints in the later stage. It's tasteless to eat and a pity to throw them away. It's better to sell them to people in need in exchange for some useful resources. Lumberyard, requirement, 40 wood, ability, logging, introduction, 3-piece set for land reclamation. You deserve it. He gave the order to build the lumberyard in the forest, subtracting the 10 pieces of wood burned overnight, and the wood used to build the mud wall frame. The 100 pieces he'd gathered on the first day were all gone. So poor, the nearly empty resource bar reminded him to replenish them quickly. Lumberyard construction countdown, 1 hour. A wooden bungalow rose from the ground, the resources seeming to flow out of thin air and pile up on the ground. Invisible workers were controlling the construction. No matter how many times you watched the automatic construction, it was still amazing. On the map interface, he filled the number of workers in the lumberyard. Once the construction was complete, villagers would come to work there automatically. Lin was moving on to the next location. There was a small berry bush and a small mineral vein waiting for him. Chapter 7, Domestication and Berries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After walking a couple of steps, Lin spun around and raced back to the edge of the woods. Under the watchful eyes of the hunting spiders, he dropped off 2 portions of food, white, gel-like blocks that thudded softly on the ground. Once he was gone, the spiders cautiously approached the gel blocks and started to feed. They used their massive claws to carve off chunks, sometimes lifting them onto their heads before scuttling into the jungle depths on their 8 legs. 2 portions of food would keep them going for days. Having recently suffered heavy losses, they needed to replenish their numbers of young hunting spiders. Lin knew he'd eventually return with the ranch blueprints to exploit this hunting spider nest. Hunting spiders only spun silk when they had plenty to eat. Both silk-producing spiders and scout spiders were evolved forms of the common hunting spider. Taming progress, 2%. The system notification popped up. Friendly gestures toward neutral creatures would increase this progress bar, while hunting them would decrease it. 2 portions of food only bumped the progress to 4%, meaning he needed roughly 50 more portions to fully tame the spiders. Non-neutral units couldn't be tamed this way. He'd have to defeat them first, or wait until he could build a special structure, an Alien Research Institute, to begin taming non-neutral creatures. Having dealt with the medium forest and the hunting spiders, Ji-Lin continued toward the small mineral vein further on. He could already see the glint of metal reflecting the sunlight, focusing on the shimmering ground. He received the following information: resources, mixed gold and iron vein, small, reserves, 2,000 stone, 400 iron ore, 400 gold, production, 50 stone/day, 12 gold ore/day, 12 iron ore/day, development, mining field, capacity, 10 people, introduction, a mixed vein of gold and iron ore, with a high stone content. Ji-Lin breathed a sigh of relief. His luck was holding. At this rate, he'd have enough resources to upgrade in just 8 days. Considering the enemy attack was scheduled for the 10th day, that left him with virtually no wiggle room. 20 Grey Wolves guarded the mineral vein. Name, Grey Wolf, type, beast, dark age, armor strength, 0, melee defense, 30, weapon power, 5, skills, beast nature, increases movement speed, the death of a companion triggers bloodlust, pack tactics I, increases hit chance and dodge chance, up to 30% when your unit count exceeds the enemy by a factor of 2, not currently active. Introduction, common wolf packs known for high meat yields. While both Grey Wolves and hunting spiders shared the pack tactics skill, the wolf numbers were usually half that of the spiders, which meant pack tactics was rarely a factor, and the wolves were far from a deadly threat. Still, their powerful bodies made them a challenge, but the spearmen, fresh from their spider hunt, were riding high on morale. He pressed the attack, wiping out all 20 wolves. Eradication complete. Hostile target, Grey Wolf. Controlled a small mineral vein. Obtained blueprint, mining field, food reserve plus 20. Grey Wolves provided a better meat yield than hunting spiders. 20 wolves yielded 20 portions of meat, 1 wolf per portion, whereas it took 2 spiders to produce a single portion of food. He wasn't as lucky as he was with the spiders, though. These unruly wolves clearly had no interest in being tamed. So, he indulged their stubbornness and turned them into dinner. Stepping over the wolf carcasses, Ji-Lin walked to the edge of the mineral vein. He could see golden flecks embedded in the rock, sparkling in the sunlight, alongside larger black chunks. He bent down and picked up a loose piece of wood, which glinted with sporadic gold, iron, and wood. Perfect. He pulled up the mining field blueprint and issued the construction order. Mining field. Requirement, 40 wood. Function, mine gold, iron ore, stone. Introduction, one of the 3 cornerstones of land reclamation. You'll need it. Right now, he lacked the necessary resources. But when they were available, the system would automatically deduct them and begin construction. In civilization lasts forever, a lord's progress was exceptionally rapid, all thanks to the system. It streamlined many labor-intensive construction tasks, allowing the lord to focus on production. Thanks to the mobile battlefield's mitigation of unit fatigue, Ji-Lin and his primitive spearmen were able to seize 2 resource points without even breaking a sweat. The 3 resource points, berry bushes, the medium forest, and the mineral vein, formed an inverted triangle, with the forest at its tip. Of the 3, only the berry bushes remained uncontrolled. Once he took them, he'd have secured all the resources he needed for the early game. Once he had all the resources secured, he'd begin mining, stockpiling them for the next era. He wanted to build as many structures for the next era as possible all at once. No need to waste precious resources in the Dark Age. The town center had 2,000 points of storage capacity, so he didn't have to worry about space just yet. He led the spearmen toward the berry bushes at a run, pausing briefly for a breather and a quick bite to eat. Berry bush. Reserves, 10,000. Production, 250 berries/food/day. Development, collection station, capacity, 30 people. The berry bushes were also guarded by Grey Wolves, 60 this time. This would be a challenge. Still, the spear formation remained as effective as ever. Following Ji-Lin's orders to maintain a tight defense, the wolves charged in one by one and impaled themselves on the spear tips. One spearman was slightly injured by a wolf that managed to flank them. Even so, all 3 resource points were now firmly under his control. Eradication complete, hostile target, gray wolf. Controlled the berry bushes. Obtained blueprint, collection station, food storage plus 120. The level of the primitive spearman has been upgraded to, well trained. There was an unexpected bonus. His primitive spearman had leveled up to level 3, in civilization lasts forever. Units were categorized into 5 tiers based on combat experience. Untrained, the unit has not been trained or has only mastered the most basic knowledge. New recruit, the unit has learned the combat knowledge of the corresponding military unit. Well trained, the unit has undergone complete training and has certain combat experience. Veteran, the unit has served for a long time and has rich combat experience. Elite, the unit has an excellent combat tradition, strong subjective initiative, and rich combat experience. The starting units were always new recruits. Now, after dispatching 3 wild monster groups, the primitive spearmen had jumped straight to the well-trained level. At the barracks, they could only be trained up to recruit. It wouldn't be until the industrial age and the construction of a military academy that initial unit levels could be raised to well-trained. Some special buildings allowed for direct recruitment of well-trained units. 2. It was rare for units to reach the elite level. When he was approaching the space age, he only had 3 elite units under his command. Thrilled, he ordered the soldiers to eat their fill of berries right in the berry bushes, and then take a break. Balance between work and rest was essential. Suddenly, the bushes across the hillside were full of his troops. Ji Lin picked a red berry and popped it into his mouth. Each berry was the size of a fist, huge, plump, and perfectly round. Not at all like anything you'd find growing wild, but who was he to complain? Sweet and sour, like a cross between a cherry and a plum, he'd always loved berries like these. They were expensive in the market, and the system only generated them in the early eras. The drop rate for a berry nursery that could cultivate these berries was ridiculously low. As usual, he took a snapshot of the collection station for the record. Once enough wood was collected, construction would begin automatically. Chapter 8 Upgrading an Enemy Attack. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8, The Original and the Enemy Attack. Time slipped by. 10 days had already flown past. What had he accomplished in those 8 days? All the mud buildings were complete. With the extra time, he built the mud wall up to 2.5 meters and added 6 platforms for primitive spearmen to stand guard, preventing monsters from scaling the walls. He'd assigned 50% of the spearmen to assist in production. The system gave a false impression of infinite capacity. Adding more people did increase resource production, but the returns diminished rapidly. He crafted a spear for himself. A lord couldn't be without a weapon. Even though he probably wouldn't be fighting on the wall, playing around with the spear was still fun. He wasn't idle. Still feeling the effects of the teleportation, he asked Chongheng how to train. After 8 days, his stamina had only improved slightly, shaving his kilometer time from 4 minutes to 3 minutes 30. A healthy body is essential. Currently, the territory had 2 active logging sites, a collection station, and a mining site. There were 2 medium-sized forests, a medium-sized berry patch, and a small mining vein. A total of 150 people were engaged in production. He divided the remaining 50% into 2 teams of 25 each, tasked with exploring the surrounding area for scattered resources. Why 25 people? Because the farther from the territory, the stronger the monsters and richer the resource points. At most, they could outpace him by 1 era. The 25 spearmen were enough to ensure a safe retreat in any situation. These teams brought back some great finds. The gold alone was enough for Ji Lin to upgrade the base. Combined with the 102 gold mined, he could now build more structures. The hunting spider taming process hit 100% yesterday. The spider's natural behavior reduced friendliness over time, but Ji Lin's constant food supply, delivered by flying bricks, turned the neutral spiders into friendly ones. Hunting spider nest, development, ranch, function, active defense. Hunting spiders will attack any enemy entering their territory. Ample food. Hunting spiders have a small chance of secondary development. Cultivate scout hunting spiders, requires ranch blueprint. Cultivate silk spiders, requires ranch blueprint. Introduction, hiss. go ahead, try to touch them. The number of hunting spiders had also recovered to 80, with many newborns added. These fist-sized spiders would need to molt several times before becoming large hunting spiders. Lin still needed the ranch blueprint to begin breeding scout spiders and silk spiders. If he couldn't find wild wolves or dogs to serve as scouts, big spiders would do. They might be ugly, but they'd be highly mobile in battle. The system's enemy attack notification was never late. Attention, lords! An enemy attack is imminent. Over. The huge font vanished, replaced by a bright red countdown. 3 hours. 3 hours, Lin gathered all the primitive spearmen and ordered the villagers to arm themselves. Armed was a stretch. They just grabbed large wooden sticks to defend other sections of the mud walls. Instead of lining the walls and guarding the entrance, the spearmen retreated slightly, forming a small semicircle around the opening, maximizing their attack range. 30 men in a ring, with 3 rings forming a spear formation, would be enough to contain any attackers. Sufficient resources detected to advance to the next era. Merge enemy attacks to advance the era. Note, merging enemy attacks will result in a higher evaluation. Merging enemy attacks was the real reason he wanted to fight 2 waves at once. Taking on one wave would only earn him ordinary rewards, resources and common blueprints. But merging 2 waves would drastically increase his base evaluation. If a normal attack was a difficulty of 1, a combined attack wouldn't simply be 1 + 1. According to Lanchester's square law, in close combat, increasing troop numbers leads to an exponential increase in combat power. Lanchester's square law proved that in equal conditions, 2,000 soldiers facing 1,000 would only suffer 268 casualties to wipe out the smaller force. Doubling the enemy attack would directly enhance the final reward. He could tell the system encouraged this. Lin didn't care. He just wanted more resources. He had prepared everything. Merge enemy attacks. Merge complete. Good luck, Lord. Town, Dark Age. Requirements to upgrade to the next era: 1,000 units of food, 400 wood, 400 eggs, 100 gold, 100 iron. Lin tapped the Advance Era button, and a chunk of eggs disappeared from the warehouse. Readiness detected. Begin the test immediately, the system asked. Lin smiled. Confirm. Confirmed. One territory lord has confirmed advance enemy attack. This round of test, Goblin X250 Grey Wolf X60. Begin. The 250 goblins were likely for this test, and the 60 Grey Wolves were the enemy attack he'd face today. The two combined, as a horn blared, a green line appeared on the horizon. It looked like a moving field of tall grass, green and thick. He spotted a goblin with pointy ears atop its oversized head, only half the height of a normal person, clutching a poorly sharpened knife. A horde of goblins. Name, Little Goblin. Type, Goblin. Dark Age. Armor Strength, 0. Melee Defense, 25. Weapon Power, 3. Features, cannon fodder. Death of this unit will not reduce the morale of other units. Low leadership. Prone to collapse. Note that enemy attack waves will not collapse, but weakening morale will significantly reduce combat power. Introduction. Wow. He'd finally met his new friends, goblins, weaker than hunting spiders, with virtually no melee defense or armor. Even their features were just 2 times lower than those of the cannon fodder leader. These 250 goblins had nothing going for them except numbers and crude weapons. If the wave contained undead skeletons, he'd be scared, since those things had physical resistance. But 250 goblins couldn't break through the gate today. The only threat was the 60 Grey Wolves. The 2.5-meter mud wall might barely hold them. Even if some villagers got involved, their smaller numbers would mean they could be killed in short order. Chongheng, find a rooftop and defend the other sections of the mud wall. If wolves climb over, lead the villagers to kill them. I'll command the front. Lin issued orders. He was still unsure if the wall could stop the wolves. He stood on a makeshift 3-meter-high wooden watchtower. Stopping the goblins would be no problem. Understood. Chongheng began patrolling the wall, spear in hand. Different generals had different styles. When he commanded the rat men, he hadn't noticed any differences between the tribes. The battle was about to begin. Lin's eyes locked onto the green wave, surging like tall grass. He wiped the sweat from his hands and shouted, "Prepare for battle." That even with everything ready, he felt like he could still be doing more. The town behind him shimmered, as if dissolving in light. Era upgrade in progress. Chapter 9 Era upgrades and rewards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Turns out his plan had a major flaw. The front line was still a complete slaughter. Changheng, on patrol, only managed to take out one lone wolf trying to scale the wall. He speared it before it could even get over. Even though the 2.5-meter wall was just packed mud, it proved an insurmountable obstacle. The test group, made up of golems and wolves driven wild by their frenzy, hadn't even considered attacking from the sides. Some wolves kept trying to charge the front, but the wooden frame reinforced the entire mud wall, more than doubling its structural strength. All that headlong rushing resulted in was a lot of bloody noses. Too many of them died. The dense, rotating spear line blunted the force of their combined charge. Even someone as inexperienced as Lin could tell the spearmen were getting tired. Stabbing with a 10-pound spear took a lot out of you. These heavy spears weren't made for swinging, just for holding the line. The corpses of the golems and wolves had filled the gap they'd left open. The golem bodies alone formed a layer waist-high along the wall. If it got any higher, the golems and wolves would use the corpses to climb over. The panel in front of him displayed the numbers: golems, 103, grey wolves, 22. Nearly 100% of the enemy was still surrounding them, ready to attack. Get ready to throw. That the villagers behind him had already grabbed the rocks he'd taken from the warehouse, following his orders. A block weighing a kilogram could seriously hurt someone. They didn't need pinpoint accuracy. Just chuck it over the wall and hope for the best. The villagers hurled the rocks as hard as they could. One volley reduced the golem group by a tenth. Was it enough? Should they pull back to create space? The corpses were piling up in that small gap. Nearly 100 bodies were stacked there, forcing the spearmen to fight enemies at a higher angle. The pile also limited the spearmen's range of attack. It was getting harder to stab. He had to admit he hadn't considered this. The pressure was intense. If the spearmen retreated even a couple of steps, they'd leave an opening for the attackers. The worst thing in a fight was losing your position. If the height of the corpses got too close to the top of the wall, climbing over would become much easier. The spearmen were fighting like mad. Lin saw that their spears and clothes were covered in monster blood, and each thrust looked weaker than the last, facing 3 times their number. But now it was closer to a 1-to-1 fight. They hadn't suffered any losses. Should he send someone out to draw off some of the golems? But there were wolves mixed in, and they were fast. His goal was to win without any casualties. Changheng, flip over the wall, make some noise, and lead them on a chase. Lin looked at the centurion, who clasped his fists and went over the wall. He figured it out. Send 100 soldiers under his command out to distract the monsters, pull them away to relieve the pressure on the front. Retreat? No way. The enemy could use the corpses to get in, but they could also use them to get out, letting the spearmen break through. Spearmen weren't just for defense. First rank, hold the line along the corpses. First and third ranks, raise your spear tips. Lin shouted. The spearmen gripped their weapons tight. Listen up. Get ready to advance. If the enemy wanted to charge, then they'd see if there were enough of them, and if their spears were long enough. Lin grabbed his spear, wanting to join the fight, but there was no room for him. He'd already assigned everyone a position, and he'd just get in the way. His judgment was right. The golems were losing it. Because of the system, they wouldn't break, but their fighting ability had been drastically reduced. The spearmen advanced with barely any resistance. Changheng took a slight injury, a scratch from a wolf that ambushed him. The golems, demoralized, were moving much slower. They couldn't keep up with Changheng as he retreated. He led them away, thinning out the forces at the front. The wolves that could keep up were quickly taken out by the spearmen on the wall. As they tried to regroup, a dying wolf leapt up and clawed Changheng's leg. The battle was over. The last golem was finished off with a spear. Perfect. The pressure was still intense. The system chimed in to announce that he'd earned an upgrade. You have successfully defended against this wave of enemy attacks. Please choose to upgrade the era. Classic era, magic. We have long known that some among us have potential beyond our wildest dreams. We don't understand it, but we can try to harness it. Classic era, runes. Do you see those lines that appear out of nowhere? They represent the fundamental rules of the universe. We can use them. Classic era, technology. We have long understood that there are no gods in the world. Everything depends on what we make with our own hands, a classic three-way choice. Each era offered different bonuses to the civilization. He wanted to choose magic or runes, but he hadn't followed the early magic builds in his previous life, and he didn't know how to play the rune meta. Besides, both magic and runes could be accessed later through regular routes. And the technology path, it granted an amazing feature when upgrading eras later. He might not choose it otherwise. In his previous life, he'd only advanced to a plain classic era, no suffix. Now he could choose one with a suffix. He felt pretty lucky. Lin chose technology, not for any reason other than it would make him level up faster. He didn't plan to stick around in the classic era for long. His real goal was to reach the third era as soon as possible. The third era was when lords could drastically reshape their civilizations. It was also where everyone had a chance to shine. You have chosen the era, classic era, technology. Era upgrade cost reduced by -20%. You have unlocked the blueprint, academy. The wonder, great library, has been added to your building options, unexpected gains. Not only was the era upgrade cheaper, but he could unlock the blueprints for the academy and the great library early. Academy. Requirements, food, 4,000, minerals, 1,200, gold, 600, features, functions as a research building. Consumes food and gold to improve the education level of the territory's population. Limited by the overseeing officer and the current civilization era. Introduction, a gathering place for wisdom, great library. Requirements, food, 4,000, minerals, 1,200, gold, 600, features, wonder, increases stability, attractiveness, and livability of the territory. Technology research speed +5%, official experience gain +5%, and hero unit generation rate +5%. Introduction, knowledge needs a home. These were great. The academy sounded nice, but it was just a research building that improved the knowledge level of the population. It had active abilities, but they cost money. Before the colonial era, when illiteracy was common, few people used the population knowledge buff. The more wonders, the better. Hero unit generation rate was hard to come by. It affected the likelihood of getting generals and officials like Chongheng and Chongshan, as well as great engineers and scientists down the line. It was just too expensive. If he remembered correctly, the library cost nearly as much as entering the third era. Your race has survived an era upgrade. Please choose a civilization trait. Another three-way choice. Blood purity, +5% physical limit, -5% physical decay, +5% experience growth, mutually exclusive with blood fusion. Subordinate population, add a subordinate population. Skilled in farming, +10% food output. Here we go. Lin focused on the trait upgrades. Era selection only changed one era, but trait upgrades were with the civilization for good. The trait upgrades offered by the three era upgrades were all good. Blood purity was what he needed most. Subordinate population gave a chance to choose a race and add subordinate races equal to the main population as slaves. The system would increase population supply each time. The subordinate race would be kept as slaves until the industrial era. You could select subordinate populations multiple times. Players called this type of feature a stackable feature. Once you selected it, it was likely to reappear in your future options, until it couldn't be stacked anymore. Non-stackable features weren't necessarily good, but they were more extreme. For example, he'd seen farsightedness in his previous life, which directly increased production and research speed, but reduced stability and increased population maintenance costs. Subspace collusion required population sacrifices in exchange for special troops and buildings, and also reduced stability. Stability was a resource. Back to the topic, too many subordinate populations turned civilizations into a pallet. The advantage was a large population, but the disadvantage was the unique problems that emerged in the Industrial Age, and the population maintenance cost was much higher. Bloodline purification would directly awaken magic after 2 stacks, stronger than general magic awakening. The 3rd stack increased total production. The second was a secret. He'd never seen anyone publicly discuss what happened after the second bloodline purification, but, ultimately, these weren't options most people ever got. Lin had only gotten a plus 5% food production after grinding out multiple lord upgrades, and there was no choice involved. Civilization lasts forever was unfair. There were a few rare features, but most seemed pulled from nowhere just to fill slots. The values were low. Lin pursed his lips and chose bloodline purification. The era and civilization rewards were chosen. All that remained was his personal reward. He was eager to see what he would get. Rewards are given according to player needs. Quest book, Steam and Steel. Equipment, hold on to the flag, increases the defense ability of the troops by 20%, minus 15% garrison morale decay. Equipment, fine steel armor, light armor infused with rune power, plus 80 armor strength. Lin's eyes were glued to the Steam and Steel quest book, an A-level quest book that could only be made by players in the first era. After all, this copy was extremely close to the normal Steam era, but it was mixed with rune and magic civilization branches. The things produced were a mix, but each was very valuable. If he could just get some good results in there, he could get the special blueprint from the classic era directly from the Steam era. Even if it was just a building blueprint for training the lowest level front-loading musketeers, it would be enough for him to dominate for several eras. While the other 2 were good, one turned you into a turtle, and the other made you a top general on the battlefield. They were nothing compared to the quest book that could get him blueprints that transcended eras. The system really understood his needs. Chapter 10 Mission Statement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What are the most dangerous places? Forget monster-infested wastelands or jump-scare horror shows, and it's not even rogue supervillains running amok. It's the battlefield. Your enemies are just like you, human. They're soldiers, and their job is to kill. The Battle of Verdun was a meat grinder, leaving millions wounded in just 10 months. On a modern battlefield, a single 7.62mm bullet to the chest can end your life. A howitzer shell whistling past means death is close. Forget how strong you think you are. Against concentrated firepower, flesh and blood are weak. These are weapons designed to maximize human-on-human violence, the true meat grinder. Steam and Steel is notorious for being a brutal scenario. Players are thrown into a month-long battle where 500,000 die, and the pass rate is only 5%. It's a wild mix of technologies from the Steam era, automatic machine troops, holdover musketeers, and even mages summoning golems. To put it mildly, it's total chaos. Since there's no real death in Vice, many just jump into these high-level scenarios for the intense experience, like watching a hyper-realistic movie. For commanders, these scenarios offer a chance to scout enemy tactics and test their own. But that's not all. According to forum surveys, only 90% of lords who attempt the scenario pass it once, and only 60% pass it on their first try. Even for the sake of their lords, most people prefer to stay safe in their own little corner. Some deliberately stagnate, refusing to advance technologically, keeping their people ignorant so they can play emperor. You can't die, but you also can't numb the pain. Death, broken bones, every sensation is fully transferred to the lord. You can bring your troops, but the system won't make it easy on you. In fact, the difficulty scales with the number and type of units you bring. The system was devious. Lin decided to take Chongheng and Zhongshan for an extended visit. In his previous life, most players were hesitant to bring their officers and generals into these scenarios to level them up. The scenario is precisely where these heroes could grow the fastest, but players were afraid of them becoming too powerful and turning on them, and they would, if you weren't a decent leader. Lin wasn't worried about controlling people. It wasn't his forte. The ruthless techniques he used on rat people weren't exactly suited for humans. He was confident he could bring back the breastplate musketeer. After all, this scenario was designed for colonial-era participants. Even the Steam era might be too advanced. Once lords got used to fire-based warfare, they could go back for exclusive tech and upgrades. Countless great mission papers were like this, which was regrettable. it seemed they were thrown into an unfamiliar environment to force the Lord to grow up. The experience and technology you have gained are the most rewarding things for human beings. Ji Lin selected the mission statement. As for his earlier reservations about acquiring super-era troops, it would be stupid not to take the chance. When opportunity knocks, you answer. First promotion, the Lord chose, classical era, technology, pure bloodline, mission statement, steam and steel. Settlement complete. Your original spearmen have been automatically upgraded to pikemen. The population supply is 25% of the current upper limit and will arrive within 1 to 3 days. Please prepare to receive. The territory has been expanded, the coast has been expanded for the first time, and the new wave of creatures has been released. Coastal. Ji Lin's eyes lit up. The coast is perfect, providing abundant food and the opportunity to cultivate valuable seafood. Seafood is expensive on the market. A blue lobster can fetch 10 gold, turning this place into another potential goldmine. Ji Lin checked his Lord interface again. Lord, Ji Lin, territorial race, human. Lord talents, foresight, fire extinguisher, planner defender, battlefield maneuver, division. Building, in the town, Army 100, territorial population, 200/1600, population capacity. Territorial building, in town, primary residence X10, territory characteristics, none, territory. Plain X1, floodplain X1, swamp X1, coast X1. The description of the Dark Age town had changed. The A-frame houses automatically built in Guanyu had grown, expanding from 2-story buildings to 3. The stone exteriors were smoother, incorporating some wooden elements of Chinese architecture. In the town, classical era improvement, food, 2400, stone, 960, wood, 960, gold ore, 320, iron ore, 320. Characteristic, medium. The stability of villagers living around this building is improved. Administrative office. You can assign an affairs officer to handle matters in the territory to increase output. Introduction, a city center. The resources required for the era upgrade have been reduced by 20%. The current town center barely deserves the name of town center. The current population limit of only 400 is just a small village. There are also more affairs officials in the town center to provide additional effects. These are things that were not available in the Dark Ages. The improvement of the era system must wait until the population of the territory exceeds the third era, that is, the system can be selected to determine its own system. So he will say that the civilization of the third era is the civilization that really begins to change drastically, and the third era, the most interesting things will just begin. The territory will evolve into a real small civilization. The official, everyone gets a general-looking official at the beginning. His official is Chongshan. Chongshan's level is totally different from his. He has the lowest level of a manager. He must be taken to the deputy to learn, or let him grind out in the territory to become an official. The main purpose is to raise him for a long time. Occasionally, there will be people in the market selling hero units and arms, and selling population. Except for yourself and the territory, you can sell almost anything in the market. Don't think that he is developing smoothly now. Other territories may not have such good luck. If the Lord wants to show his command ability as a micromanipulator, he will be doomed. Although the generals and officials sent in are stupid, they can definitely surpass 80% of the lords. This is not a lie. In fact, there are still many players staying in the city during the most critical 10 days at the beginning of the game. The faster the improvement, the greater the advantage. The production capacity brought by the improvement of the times is exponentially improved. Civilization lasts forever squeezes the process of several years or even tens of thousands of years together. This also leads to the snowballing of each advantage to widen the gap in the end. The normal replacement of the times follows the historical cycle law. The productivity explodes, the population explodes, and after the population explodes, it will approach the dangerous critical line of food. When a disaster occurs, there is no food to eat in the land, and these exploded populations will fall into a state of famine. The hungry people will revolt, and an era will fall into decline. Then the curve will reach a balance again, with an increase in productivity, a decrease in population, and a change in production relations. Of course, this is a very, very simple explanation. The actual situation is thousands of times more complicated than this. Speaking of this, this is where the trap of the system lies. After the Dark Ages and before the Industrial Age, even if you develop to the extreme, a normal civilization cannot support its full population without special resources, even if you rely on rivers. Relying on rivers will greatly reduce the difficulty of obtaining food. Except for Lin, who can touch the floodplain at the beginning, others have to be very lucky to encounter rivers. At most streams and lakes, the collection in the wild will eventually dry up, and the advancement outward in the wild will be frustrated without the era of improvement. Relying on the slow growth of cultivated land, it is difficult for food to bear so many suddenly increased populations. Some lords like extravagant customs, which is even more doomed. In the middle period, a lot of lords fell into the food supply trap. It was really miserable to watch them operate at that time, and the whole forum was wailing, the system will not help you replenish the loss of population. Either go to the market to buy population, or wait for the lord to have children. The system is full of bad water.